Ladies and gentlemen, guys and girls, welcome to the very first episode of the Age of Warfare podcast of 2026. Yes, we have into the new year, and we are ready to do some big things for you guys. And we have a very fun episode for you on the very first episode of 2026. I hope everyone had a wonderful, wonderful new year. And I hope you guys are ready for some fun episodes. So before we get started, I know. A couple of weeks ago we said that we were going to talk about the Cossacks, and we will be talking about the Cossacks, just not this week. That will be our next episode. That's because we actually came up with a really better idea. After all, we're in 2026, right? We just into the new year. So why not we talk about the history of calendars, which should be a fun topic, and the different historical calendars that were used. So that should be a really fun episode for you guys to watch. But as always, before we get started, Aiden, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing all right. It's completely lost track of days as you normally do over the Christmas period. Had some good times with friends and family. And just trying to get everything set for the new year now, like washing uniform for work and all of those things that you don't actually want to do. So it's all going well. Still a bit tired because obviously didn't have anything to do, so I just decided to lay in bed and watch Star Trek all day. So my brain doesn't know whether I'm awake or not.
That sounds like a fun idea, my friend. For me, it was no-key. Might be discussed about before the show. It was a no-key New Year celebration, and we just waited for the fireworks. I mean, I will say the fireworks weren't as many fireworks this year. I mean, the government did start to crack down on fireworks here, so that could have played a role. But we still had a decent show with fireworks, people throwing them up and all that. But it was a peaceful New Year's, and I'm excited for January 6th. That's the release day of my first book release, the Pina Coladas and Rats Omnibus Edition. So I'm excited for that. That should be a big release for me, and we should get a good start on sales. But I don't want to get sidetracked by that because we got a good one for you today, guys. We are going to talk about the history of calendars. So I was doing some research before the show. And I was trying to look up what was the first calendar ever invented, right? So,
it's a good one, yeah.
So the first calendars I kind of looked up. It was in Scotland back in 8000 BC. It was a series of pits and an arc used by Masonic hunter-gatherers to track moon phases and seasons. It's considered to be the earliest known calendar. Yeah, ironically in Scotland. How you might that?
It's very similar. So it's one of the things about Stonehenge, where
yes.
Yeah, it used the similar system because it was a few years back we had a drought in the UK, and so one of the things you get in archaeology is if you have ground that's dry. The ground's been broken, which people will know this from just general life. That ground stays a bit wetter. So what you get with archaeological areas is you see the shadows of these pits. So they found sort of similar things as well. And it's always been thought that Stonehenge was not a calendar per se, but to mark certain parts of the year as well. So it seems that they had this, and then they were using it to track things, and then creating monuments that used this calendar. So we had the evidence of, like Stonehenge is evidence of usage of a calendar, and this is the evidence of the calendar that they may have likely used.
Yep, and as we see, we have the Roman field. This is the idea of it behind it. And then you have a little caption here. Let's read this together. Approximately 10,000 years ago, it's made up of 12 pits, each apparently corresponding with a different phase of the moon. What's more amazing is the evidence that the pits were repeatedly calibrated with the solar year so that they stayed accurate for a long time. the pits were used to keep track of time for about 6,000 years before they were inexplicably abandoned for some reason. Yeah, obviously nobody knows why they were abandoned, but they were. And this is where the idea of Stonehenge comes into play to a degree.
Yeah, because it's one of the things that people often forget with this is they were very accurate when they were digging these things. So something simplest would be before you had ditches, you used to dig something called pit alignments, which were these pits about 80 centimeters to meter across, so about 3 foot, and they were staggered. And you used it because you wanted the soil to mark the boundary. It wasn't until they properly got into irrigation where they started to cut these together to make them into ditches. But you still have the evidence within the earlier segmented ditches and ditches of these pits being used where they had this idea of what they wanted to do, and they did that. And the amount of accuracy that goes into it is quite astonishing, really.
So there's I need an aerial view of what the pit might have looked like. That's an aerial view of it. So that's pretty much the original calendar, and that's. But now I want to move on to what we believe is to be the first 365 day year calendar, which is the Egyptian calendar. With the Egyptian calendar, it was essential for Nile-based agriculture. Yes. That was a big thing because back in the Egyptian times, you had the Nile River, and you had to accurately predict the rise and the ebbs and the flows of the Nile River for farming and agriculture.
And this is one of the big things that you only create a calendar really because you need it for a thing. So, like I said before, with the pits, it's often you do that because things, when you've got an area that's very seasonal, you need to know certain things that happen in seasons or when they're going to happen. Either it be for religious festivals or for something physical. So Scotland's known for quite extreme weather back then. It was as part of the UK. So it had these differences. So in Egypt, obviously, they had this extreme flooding and the contraction of the Nile. So because it was such a lifeblood, obviously, they needed to work out when that happened. So they needed some sort of way of working that out because it was so fundamental to life. So the calendar is then, again, coming about because they need to track something specific. And then they're using the moon or the sun to track these things.
Right. And obviously, we have 365 days, 12 months a year. That's the modern calendar. The Egyptians were the inventors of that because they were the ones who came up with the 365 days, calendar, the civil calendar. But in Egypt, they were divided into 3 seasons, which was Aket, which is Indonesian, the flood season. So obviously back then, everybody would pray to Osiris for the Aket because they needed a good flood, so to enrich the soil, right? And this is actually done pretty good in if you ever play Pharaoh, the city building game. This is kind of my first bump into the Egyptian calendar, the Aket, the flood season. And then there's another good game called Children of the Nile, Immortal Cities of Egypt, another good city building game. And that one gets into even finer detail. So after Aket, then you had Poet, which was the planting season. The floods go down and you start planting. So, you start planting your wheat, your barley, your vegetables and all that. And then the harvest was Shemu. The harvest. This is when the dry season, you start to harvest your crops. And the Egyptians carefully planned the planting to match with the weather. And that's why they had the calendar.
This is one of the big things that we see going on, where they divided the year into these different seasons. as well is seasons are very important if you're an agricultural based society, as Angel's describing. Like the certain seasons are when you plant the main crop that you're going to use. Certain seasons when you know it's going to flood. Certain seasons are when you know you're going to have a dry spell. So that's the better to do the harvesting in that period, because there's no point in planting anything as well. So that's where you've got the time to do all of those things. So working with the land and finding a way to work out when that's happening as well.
And it's funny, Aidan, that even in modern times, even in the modern times, we still follow this. You know, even with all the advancements in technology and all that, we still follow the old calendar. Like when I used to live in New York in the winter months, we didn't plant nothing because nothing would grow. Then in the spring, we start planting stuff. And, you know, you start to get the spring showers bring May flowers, the April showers. So you know, and then in the summer it'd be a little bit drier, and now you have all the sun hitting the crops, hitting the plants, so they can grow. And then the fall comes, that's the harvest season. You start to harvest. So it's funny that, you know, we still kind of follow that. Even in today's world, we still follow a very what you might call it, a structured calendar.
It's one of the things I find quite interesting about it as well is that where for most of us we'll follow the seasons roughly because it's when you are likely to expect that you're going to need to take your umbrella out, or you're going to wear a bigger coat, or it's like the whole spring clean because you know you're going to have fresh air to be able to do things like repainting and then still leave your windows open. And then obviously planning for the summer and things like that, where we still use that as a basis for our lives. But because of climate change, where the climate has changed, it's shifted when people do a lot of these things as well, because it's the actual days and months don't mean much. It's their way of tracking and going, right, cool. So we've worked out that because the season shifted slightly, the start date for this bit is now on this day of this year. So that's when we're going to aim to do our planting, is around that time, checking the weather and things. And this is where I'm sure you've heard before, like farmers' almanacs and things, where people would use them quite a lot as well. That kind of concept comes in because seasons are variable even year on year when you're not taking into account climate change. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was about to bring up the farmers' almanac, so very, very good observation there, Aidan. And another good observation was that there were two different calendars in Egypt. Believe it or not, there were two different sets of calendars. You had the solar calendar, the one we know, the solar calendar used for planting. But you also had the lunar calendar, which was used for religious festivals. It was a separate calendar. They used the lunar calendar.
Yeah, which is still very common in the modern world.
Yeah. Well. And by the way, and another fun fact that you might not know is that the Egyptian calendar is called the Coptic calendar, and it continues to be used in Egypt by the Coptic Church and the general populace, particularly farmers in the rural areas, to calculate agricultural seasons in Egypt. Because by the way, modern Egypt, it might be modern, but they still have the Nile River.
Yeah, even if you've got a tractor, you're still waiting on the flood to happen at the same time.
Yeah, but this is what I'm saying. Even though we have so much advancement in technology, we still rely on something that was invented over 5,000 to 10,000 years ago, which I find amazing. That's how crazy it is. And here's another fun fact. There was something called the Decree of Canopus. I don't know if you know about the Decree of Canopus in 238 BC. And it proposed adding a leap day every 4 years, which was later adopted by the Romans, by Augustus.
I didn't know the name of it, but I knew it was the Egyptians who first looked into this.
Yep. So the decree of Canopus, but it wasn't adopted until Augustus around 26 to 25 BC, so it could align with the Julian calendar. Which blends in nicely to our next topic, which is the Julian calendar. The Julian calendar is very interesting because it's still, even though it was invented by the Romans, and by Julius Caesar, which is where it got its name from, the Julian calendar. It was a solar calendar with 365 and added a leap day every 4 years. It's still used today. There's still institutions that use the Julian calendar.
Yep, yeah, it's quite a few as well. It's like in general, when we look at it, the Julian calendar tends to be used more by sort of the Eastern Christian church and countries that came out of that. So you might see it more. This is what I find fascinating for a Roman calendar, that it was used by them more. But it's more like you find it in Russia, Bulgaria, Romania, that area, Ukraine, that sort of area of the world that we're looking at, where you traditionally see more Orthodox areas as well, because the Orthodox calendar, they've tweaked it a little bit, they've revised it for certain things, but that's still their calendar as well. It is oddly enough even the Western Church still uses that mix of solar and of the lunar calendars as well. So you have certain things like Easter, for example. Easter is based on the lunar calendar, which is why it's a movable feast, because obviously the phases of the moon and when they fall within the solar calendar do change quite dramatically over a few years, which is why we get certain movable feasts. And Easter is obviously the most prominent one of these, whereas a lot of the other ones are pinned to our standard solar calendar that we use in the West, which is why when you look at Christmas traditions, a lot of the ones, the further you go east, you only even have to go into East Germany to start seeing this. Is the stuff starts happening a bit later. Things like this, people will be celebrating certain parts of it at this time of year. For us, we're like, wow, it's the beginning of January.
For example, January 6th.
Yeah, it's a very, very important day, and that still sticks around in Western tradition, with that being a traditional day on the Gregorian calendar, where you would take down your Christmas decorations. And that goes back to how it was important under the Julian calendar, and it's a hangover in our Western,
over here in Puerto Rico, we have something called Three Kings Day, which is actually a federal holiday here in Puerto Rico, a state holiday here in Puerto Rico. That's actually big for us. That's actually when the kids get their presents. Kids don't get when they get their presents on Christmas. They get it on Three Kings Day here in Puerto Rico, and that's common in Latin America actually too. Now, Latin American cultures, celebrate Three Kings Day, January 6th.
Yeah, because it's still, a lot of it is based on those older Julian calendar traditions. And
exactly.
Because the traditions have grown up around that date, while the physical day on the calendar's changed, that's still the day, because it's X amount of days after this event happens. And if you're counting from those days, that's how you end up with things movable, and how these days end up being on seemingly weird days for how we celebrate our year.
Now, I want to take a step back from the Julian calendar, because the Julian calendar was invented by Julius Caesar and implemented by his Augustus Caesar. But before that, we had the old Roman calendar. We had the old Roman calendar, and in the old Roman calendar, you had what they call a 10th month calendar instead of a 12th month calendar. So starting in March, I had 10 months, 304 days, but then later, King Numa Pompilius added January and February to create the 12-month, 355-day calendar. But it's still, but it was changed to not, though, the old Roman calendar. So what we're looking at here is the calendar by Romulus, the first king of ancient Rome. So you had Martius, Aprilus, Maius. You get the idea.
It's you start off looking at let's name it after gods. We brought out, let's just name it after numbers.
Yeah, but so it started as 10 months, but then they added 2 more months. And that's why the Julian calendar was invented, because let's face it, this old Roman calendar just had to be redone so many times that it was causing another confusion.
It was, but as you said, obviously people were looking at the calendar more as a seasonal thing,
Right.
as well. So while you had these different dates, and the dates may move, they're still looking at it as, all right, so we need to look at this season as well. So our normal spring, summer, autumn, winter sort of growing cycle season, and while they would fall at different times. This even goes into Roman time as well, where the hours were flexible. They were just divided up into the morning, the afternoon, the evening, and then the night time. And obviously throughout the year, those would shift in time as well. So it wasn't odd for them to have these shifting set parts of it that were more to do with the natural world and what the natural world was doing. And it was more, the calendars were then used for the record side of things. So in the year of such and such a console, it may happen that it's exactly a year later, but when the calendar changes, the date that's on the scrolls of the year of in this year of the console, the date part of it would be different depending on which of these forms of calendar they ended up using over time. But it would still be around the same seasonal time of year that those things may have happened.
So obviously, as we established, the old Roman calendar started with 10 months, but then Numa Pompeius, who was actually a king of ancient Rome, he was a king of ancient Rome. He was born in 753 BC. So we're going back way in time to the Roman kingdom. Yeah. So he added Inerius and Fabrarius. So Inerius is January, and Fabrarius, you can guess, is February, to cover the winter gap, because you obviously had the winter gap in, once you went further to the north, once you got away from the Mediterranean, you started to see winter. You started to see what we call snow. You started. So
it's actually cold.
It was that. So because the thing about Rome is it started in Latium, the region of Latium. That's what Rome is, Latium. But because they were so close to the Mediterranean, they didn't really get much of a winter, because the Mediterranean is always, what you would call a temperate. It's always the same. It's the same weather every, for year round. Maybe it's a little cooler over the winter, but it's not like in the United Kingdom where it gets really cold in the winter. You can see the difference. It gets cold in the United Kingdom, and then it gets really warm in the summer. That wasn't the case it's not the case in the Mediterranean. So then as ancient Rome expanded north towards Mediterranean, closer to the Gauls, they started saying, wait a minute, it's snowing? It's snowing out here. So it's like,
as soon as you hit the Alps, you've got to start thinking about these things, even though the Southern Alps is still relatively Mediterranean. It's mainly because they're told that you start seeing this, because as soon as you start seeing that, they're like, oh, hang on a minute, as you say, there's something else happening here that we have to start factoring in. So there's making it a bit more granular.
But that's the thing about history, though. This is why we like doing these shows, because sometimes the big things come from the smallest, and let's be real, the dumbest things in the world. Like, how do you not know it's snowing outside? How do you not account for that at first? Yep. But something as stupid as winter and snow and cold, again, like I said, because the Romans were stuck in Latium, before they took over the Etruscans, which we have to do an episode about the Etruscans one day.
Yeah, we really do. That's one we really definitely need to revisit.
Yeah. And then,
one of the things that I will point out at this point, because we're going to move on to it quickly, if you look at the names of the months, it's very easy, and especially the ones added, it's very easy to show that we have the anglicised names for the month, apart from two very important months, which we are going to get to.
Well, let's get into them right now, shall we?
Yeah.
So what 2 months do you see that you want to talk about?
So, Quintilis and Sextilis.
Okay.
What happened to these months? Where have they gone?
Right.
And this is where we start getting into why the Julian calendar started out as a bit weird.
Yeah, the Julian calendar was a very weird one. As we established, it was invented by Julius Caesar was formed in 45 BC, adopting a solar year of 365 and a quarter days, because you have to account for the neat day once every 4 years going in the Julian calendar. So Quintus, whatever happened to that month? That because you were hinting at that.
Well, after June, we have July. Why might it be called Julius or July? That seems very suspicious, doesn't it?
Right, exactly. So it was the fifth. So it started because it was the fifth month in the early Roman calendar, which started in March. Don't forget, we didn't have January and February yet, right? And then it made it the seventh month. And then it was renamed Anilius in 44 BC to honor Julius Caesar. Now this is when we get into the Julius Caesar idea. It just shows how influential, Caesar was. Because that's the first thing you think about is Caesar. Even though you had a bunch of emperors like Augustus, Nero, Constantine, you could go down the list.
It's the fact that even the second part, being Caesar, his name became the title, being Caesar as well. So both parts of his name became incredibly.
And don't forget, and there's one more fact we have to account for. He came from the very prestigious Julii family.
Yeah, because everyone forgets their names were the other way around. As
well. Julian.
Like you might find with Chinese names as well, where the family name often comes first as well, because that's the important bit. So you're from this family. So think about it like having your dates written with the year first. So you're going, it's this year, which would be your family name, and then you have the second bit, which is narrowing it down a bit. This is your. That's where your first name comes in. And then when you need to narrow it down further, we then go from the month then to the day, and that's where you get in these second names that come in, because you might have a popular name within the family. So you need to then identify this person is this. Like you have names where, like in the US, the whole someone the second or someone the third, and those names come up as well. Or senior and junior is one that comes up in, that's is quite a UK-based one, but comes up in slightly posher society within certain parts of the US as well. So you find the Romans had this idea of this working things out from that. So the important part comes first. So this is where they then start getting into these calendar names.
And now we get into the other one you were talking about, Sextus. Sextus is another interesting one, because here we go again talking about the Caesar family, because Sextus was the original Latin name for what we call August. It was supposed to be the 6th month, Sextus, right? It was known as the 6th month in the original Roman calendar, but in 8 BC, the Roman Senate renamed it to Augustus. August.
Yeah, and it yet again, those two people created the names the emperors would then be known by. The Augustus and the Caesar would become the titles, and these went into months. It's always a wonder if there was another member of the family who'd have been like that. Would we have started to have all the months renamed after emperors until we got through 12 of them? That'd have been quite interesting.
That would be, but don't forget, we only had 12 months in the year, right? We had hundreds of emperors in ancient Rome. So imagine we had a month named Tiberius or Tiber, the month of Tiber.
That would have been quite interesting.
but for some reason they never continued it, either because they didn't want to confuse people, or the emperors that came after Augustus were that were just not worthy of that, and that seems to be what happened. I mean, you could say Constantine was pretty good, but no.
That's an interesting one. Why we don't have the month of Constantine? It's interesting that never happened. When
although one could say Constantine the Great came much later in history, and he came, he came in the Byzantines in the Eastern Roman Empire when the Roman Empire was split. Don't forget we were talking about the split of Rome between the Western Roman Empire and the Byzantines, or would become the Byzantine Empire.
This is the other thing to remember as well is Julius Caesar was reforming the calendar, but the calendar did need reform because it was starting to get slightly off. So renaming a month after yourself because you've reformed it, because when you look at those 2 months, they're the only 2 months that really sort of stuck out as, well, these are named really badly. So it's the months following on from that, the ones with numbers on, whereas the ones before that are about the gods. So January, about Janus, the two-headed god, the one that looks forward and looks backwards. The reason it started with Martius was because Mars was the god of Rome. So you start your year with the celebration of the god of your city. It's like if you looked at any of the ancient Greek cities, like their most important day where they would see it as renewal of the year would come from their festival around that god that was the patron of their city as well. So it wasn't particularly a new thing to have this sort of thing coming around. This was the time when people were trying to work these things out. Right. As you said, obviously Constantine comes a lot later when these things are solidified. They're arguing about other things like the calendar of the church rather than the actual calendar that's used to date things.
Yeah, and don't forget, Constantine was the first one to convert to Christianity. So that was another big thing. It took Rome away and kind of took the Byzantine Empire away from the pagan gods they had of Mars, and kind of went into the Christianity. Although ironically, on a bit of a tangent, ironically, the Byzantine Empire became the Orthodox. They went from inventing what was the Roman Catholic Church, and they became Orthodox. While the main Roman Catholic Church transferred to Rome. Just a nugget of history there, and weird too.
Yeah, it's that split between the East and West, where it was. So remember this time as well, where you have these two major branches of Christianity. You still have all of the smaller branches. So when people talk about the Crusades, they often think about it of the eponymous Roman Catholic Church going out, finding pagans, killing them, and nicking their things, or fighting against Muslims because they were seen as the big aggressor to the church against Christianity as a whole. But this time you have all of these little things like Arianism, nothing to do with the whole Hitler thing. It's a different branch that comes through. And that was partially influenced by Mithraism, which was obviously, as we've talked about before, it's the Romans could have gone two ways, and it wasn't certain they were going to become Christian, that there was a very high probability that they'd have become Mithriditic, and Mithraism would have become the religion. So you find certain bits of Christianity form around the Mithraism things, and if you look deep into Christianity, you can actually find some of these things that come through in the way that people.
Hey, Dungeon Dan.
Hello.
Thank you for coming on by. And you know, really, Dungeon, I'll be honest, we don't really have a set time. It all depends when me and Aiden are set. So, you know, we used to do a 10 o'clock starts, but we don't really have a set time anymore. We just do it when we can. But we always make sure it's on a Saturday. So, but thank you for coming on by. And you're not late at all. You know, we're just talking about the old Julian calendar, the old Egyptian calendar. And anything you missed, Dungeon Dan, and anyone else who might be watching, the replay will be up after we get off here, so you can watch it at your own leisure. And it's good that you came by, Dungeon Dan, because now we're going to get into the good stuff. We're going to get into the Mayan calendar.
Yeah. And that was the. Let me just get my thing up. There we are.
Yep, the Mayan calendar. Obviously, the Mayan calendar, you might have bumped into the Mayan calendar in 2012.
Yeah.
And according to the Mayan calendar, the war was supposed to end in the end of 2012, but as we can see, that didn't really happen. But here's the graphics, the Mayan graphics, representing the days, the main. And then so it was a very and then you look at the bottom, December 21st, 2012 is the 14th back term, which is written. That's how you write it. But and that was ironically supposed to be the end of the world for us, according to the Mayan calendar.
It was, yeah. It's that sort of thing. This one. It's. I always put it down to. It's like when you watch 1950s sci-fi. And then you watch things like, they had such high hopes for us for doing these things. Like even when you get into sort of 80s stuff as well, like Back to the Future, or even some of the stuff that came out in between, like Space 1999. The speed of technology sort of stagnated with space stuff as well. They thought we'd have all of these other things. And I think this is the thing that you get with the Mayan calendar, that they thought that this is so far in the future that like it's we've just put it in the future at this point, because it all kind of works out at that point. And when we finally reach that point in the future and we look back, we go, that's interesting that it correlates to this point. But yeah,
now,
it's
so now let's get into let's back away for a bit and talk about the Mayan calendar, because the Mayan calendar is not just one calendar. The Mayan calendar, it's a complex system of interlocking circles. Let me see if I can find a good picture of that for you.
And if people play board games, I can't remember the name of it, but there's a cool board game that's based on the Mayan calendar. I remember it for life for me, but it's really quite fun. It's got elements of like civilization and stuff in it. But yeah, I recommend having a look for it.
So it's actually a very complex system of interlocking circles, primarily featuring the 260-day sacred calendar. Then you had the Hayab, the 365 solar calendar, that we use, and then the non-count for tracking fast periods. So the linear non-count track dates it had a mythical start date of August 11th, 3114 BC. So according to the Mayan calendar, that was the beginning of the known world, August 11th, 3114 BC, and recorded history, which kind of makes a little sense because recorded history started around that time period. You had the Sumerians, you had Mesopotamia, you had the beginning of Egypt. The Egyptian was nothing but a bunch of tribes before they unified. So that's kind of almost accurate.
Coincidences are really quite interesting, actually. When you look at the formations of people and how states ended up forming, and then you get, as you say, that point in history is the point in history where you get these formations, these peoples that we know of, and then they start writing things down and recording things, and you start getting cities and emperors and kings and pharaohs, and all these things start to appear around that time. But so for them to have a very similar time for it is really quite interesting.
Yep. So let's get into because there was three main cycles. You had I'm going to try to pronounce the Tosonic, which is the sacred, which is known as the religious calendar, which is the equivalent to the lunar calendar in Egypt. This is the sacred calendar. It's a 260-day cycle formed by 13 members, and it was used for religious ceremonies, and determining auspicious dates. So this is like your religious calendar, like in the Catholic religion, you have your ordinary day, you have Advent, you have Lent, Easter. That's the Catholic calendar. So that's the equivalent of what that is.
Each period has a different name, and I used to know all of these off by heart. But if you look at a priest or a vicar, the stole that they'll wear and various robes. They're all in very specific colours depending on the time of year and what festival it is and where it falls. So you have this very specific religious calendar where these certain events happen. That if that's a thing that you do, you tend to learn these things as well.
Right.
But it's very much for the priesthood, as it were, for them to be able to track the year in how they track it religiously. And so this is a thing that we still do in modern society as well. This isn't some weird ancient thing. This is actually a thing that everyone does.
Yeah, like religiously, we still do it. So then we move on to the Harab, which is the solar year, the 365 that we all are going into. And we have 18, but this one has 18 months of 20 days each. So this was a little strange. It didn't have the 12 months. It had 18 months of 20 days. So and then it was used for, of course, agricultural and civil purposes. But it had 18 months with 20 days each, plus a final unlucky 5-day month called the Yeb or the Ueb. It was an unlucky 5-day month to make up the. To make up the final 5 days to make 365.
So I do wonder about this. So we talked before about how seasonal we work on a 4-season basis, and obviously the Egyptians, as you said, works on a 3-season basis. And when you've got a climate that's so focused around a specific thing, so the Nile, you're going to have that minimum of 3 seasons. You've got the when it floods, when you plant, and when you harvest. Whereas obviously when you get into, as we talked about, into especially Northern Europe, we have those 4 seasons where we have that bit where you really don't do anything, and then the other 3 seasons that are sort of in between those seasons. And then that last season is used for other things around the agriculture. I'm wondering, considering the part of the world that they were in and how mixed the environment was, where you had when you look down at, say, sort of like the Andes is a great place to look for this. Of each valley was different in and of itself, that had all of these different things. And you get to the top of the Andes where people were living, and that's a different climate system as well. And then you've got your jungle, and then you've got your coastline system. I'm wondering if they split it into more months, because the 20 days meets up with the religious calendar days, so that kind of logically makes sense. But whether it's to cope with this fact that they've got such diverse area that they're dealing with, that it allows them to have this easier spread of time when it comes to essentially a seasonal time within a solar calendar.
So now before we move on, obviously the Mayan calendar, the Harab, was remarkably accurate for a solar year, and the system could predict astronomical events. And now that people look to this calendar for its sheer accuracy, and this brings me up to, like we said, 2012, the very popular theory of the world was going to end in December 21st, 2012. But as we found out later, it was misinterpreted as doomsday. That was a misinterpretation. It was simply an end to a major creation cycle, not the world. So here we go, jumping on the doomsday, the doomsday clock, and it was just us being stupid because we didn't study. So there you go.
It's when you look at it from that perspective, it's a bit like us being in the Holocene as well, and then you have these other time periods of history. So obviously we know them more for looking at dinosaurs, like the Jurassic, the Cretaceous, and you've got all of these different names for time periods. Essentially all they calculated is roughly when that time period would end, which when you look at it is actually so you look at the way the climate's changing in the world. And one of the big things that comes out of that time of year is the shifting in the magnetic poles, which hasn't happened, and it should have happened. And there is a slight shift. No one quite knows why, and they're still doing more study into it. But it's why you have magnetic north, true north, and there's the other north that you use when you're sailing. So we've got different types of north on our maps as well. But it's this shift within a magnetic pole, where a magnetic pole will flip to the other end. And we know that that's a thing because of archaeological studies where you can do magnetometry and things like that, and you can study the patterns of how you use this to identify the date of a hearth. Because when a stone is burnt, the bits inside it, you're getting into the real science of it here, they align towards the magnetic poles with, it's all to do with the metallic elements and everything. So that you know where the magnetic pole shifted through over time, so you can therefore date it because the magnetic pole has shifted from that. Like carbon dating, we know how much carbon was in the atmosphere at the time and how much carbon is lost over time. Therefore, you can calibrate to those types of things. So it does make me wonder as well if they'd worked out these great cycles and it was along those types of lines where they'd seen this change. Because one of the early ways that people noticed that the magnetic field changes was with the flight of birds. Homing birds, one, for example, but also migratory birds. When you look at the area the Mayans are in as well, there's a lot of migration going on because they're between the northern continent and the southern continent. So they're seeing this migration from one climate area to another area quite a lot. So you can track those migration patterns. So them not knowing about these magnetic field shifts is because they didn't know about magnetism, but they knew something may have been going on with these things as well. So it makes me wonder if this is actually part of the thought process that's in there, which then is why you get all of these coincidences of things that are happening with our world at the moment that seem to fit with this epoch idea that they had within the Mayans as well, that there's these other bits that they did know. When you look at some of the stuff that the Egyptians and ancient Greeks were doing as well, you look at that and think, what? As well, even not to get into conspiracy theories, the Antikythera mechanism, that is like far ahead of its time. They were able to do things because they were working on that science particularly. This goes back to what I was saying about sci-fi, that there are things that we could have now if we kept on with certain space things, but we wouldn't have other things because we'd have been working on that instead. So they focused on that thing, but then they didn't have some fundamental things that we had. Like they thought that we could see as the light shone out of our eyes. We know that that's utter nonsense. Yet at the same time, they can calculate the movements of the Earth and planets for thousands of years hence because they understood those mechanisms, which we still use on a daily basis within our science today. So you've got this nice dichotomy in there where you've got, and this goes back to our civilization tech trees. Like they focused on one tech tree and not the other tech tree. And I think that is one of the things that's come in here with this as well, which is why it's so interesting.
So a couple of things. Dungeon Dan said, I think the media was more to blame for the whole Maya. And the media. Yeah, of course. I mean, we established that it was just a misinterpretation. But sometimes the media wants their clicks. They want the views, blah, blah, blah. But he did say we did get a pretty good movie out of it. Yeah. What's the name of the movie, Dungeon Dan? I think I remember it, but I don't necessarily remember the name. If you can look up the name.
2012. It was literally called 2012.
2012? Yeah, that might be it. Yeah, that might be it.
What was the other one with the trees as well? The bees. And it was like the trees were trying to kill us off. That was because of the plant thing. That came up the same thought process as well with the world's climate change thing. 2012,
yeah, okay. Yeah. All right, very good. All right. And one more thing, another note, Aiden, we got to do a show about carbon dating. That may be something you're really good into. I mean, you're an archaeologist, so that's probably more your expertise.
Yeah. And the happening. Thank you, Dr. Dan. The happening. Yeah, that's a great film.
All right. So now we're going to get into the calendar that we're all familiar with now, which is the Gregorian calendar. The Gregorian calendar, that's the one that we're more used to. So let's bring up. So the Gregorian calendar was invented to replace the Julian calendar. And the reason we call it the Gregorian calendar was because in 1582, it was introduced by Pope Gregory VIII. and this was to better align with the solar year, featuring 365 days with leap years every 4 years. So it pretty much defined our modern concept of dates and times. But if you pay attention to the calendar here on the board, you might see something odd, Aiden.
It's
1582.
So if people remember back to an episode we did last year about missing years in history.
Yes.
So this is the basis of where that comes from, is from the thought process in that time period where you can just cut dates out. So as you see, October got shorter, which I think we'll thank God, because October isn't the best of months, and we get to Halloween quicker. So Pope Gregory, master at this thing.
Dungeon, and we know. And like I said, this was done on purpose. This was actually done on purpose. It could, because what happened when you went for the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar, and it corrected the drift of the older system by adjusting leap year rules and initially skipped 10 days to adoption in Catholic countries, and then Protestant nations adopted it much later. Protestant nations adopted the Gregorian calendar much later. So obviously this had to do with religion. This was more of a religious thing for Catholic countries. So the Catholic countries are adopted in 1582. So basically, countries like Spain and Italy, they adopted it really quick. They adopted it like that. Now for countries like Britain and the colonies, the Protestant colonies, they took them a little longer. They adopted it in 1752. They adopted the Gregorian calendar in England, because Protestant nations, and then of course might be established. The Eastern Orthodox religions still use the Julian calendar for religious purposes in the Eastern Orthodox religions.
So what really becomes quite amazing here is...
before we get into that, I want to look. You said I watched the Josh Gates show about missing 20 years of history. Yeah, like we said, we were talking about that in the show before, man, and when it really wasn't missing, of course.
So there's two interesting things. One thing I want to know: did they change it to get rid of it between the Thursday and Friday? Because that has quite an impact, purely because of how both social and religious life works in Western Europe. So traditionally in the UK, this seems completely out of left field here. In the UK, we have our general elections on the third Thursday of March, when we have a general election. And it is always on a Thursday. We have our elections on Thursdays. The reason you have an election on a Thursday is because people get paid on a Friday. It's the day they'd be most sober, which is quite a fun thing. Now, you also have when the week starts. So if you work in a shop, a week doesn't start on a Monday. A week starts on a Sunday, rather than a Monday. Which
that's important. That's important because traditionally or socially, we accept Monday to be the start of a new week. I'm guilty of it as well when it's really Sunday. But because as Christians and Catholics, we always adopt Sunday to be the day of Christ, which is the final day of the week because of religion.
So it's modified to do with shops because Sunday is often a quiet day for sales that then lets you do the admin, setting things up and getting started on Monday, because religion isn't hitting you, because the religious part of it is it's quieter on a Sunday because people are going to church or going out. So then it allows the shops to do that thing. So the shop, being a secular thing, uses the Sunday as the start of its week rather than Monday. It takes a bit of getting used to, but it's a thing. Which is often why you'll see calendars like this, where it has the Sunday at the start of the week as well. So it's a very business thing to do that. And it's all about giving you setup time as well. It's a purely practical thing as well. But obviously Friday, Saturday and Sunday, depending on if you're Islamic, if you're Jewish, or if you're Christian, depends which of those days is the important one. So they all have significance within the Judeo-Christian calendar, your Fridays, your Saturdays, and your Sundays. So Fridays you're only supposed to eat fish. If you're really super traditional Catholic, that comes out of the monk's diet. So there's certain things you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be like preparing yourself for the weekend and things. So I wonder if they did it between a Thursday and Friday, because people, while they would be working, say, Monday to Friday, they would then see that as missing that time between Thursday and Friday, didn't see them missing that time for the religious part of it, which is your Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Your vicar's starting to get ready for your Sunday on a Friday, and so on and so forth.
I did.
If that's a specific thing.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but the thing, although there's a funny thing about the religious aspect, Sunday is usually religious unless you're a Seventh-day Adventist, and because they believe in Saturday is the final day. Just wanted to bring that up, but there you go.
This isn't Saturday. Jewish is Saturday as well.
Yes, and the Jews, yes.
And that's why
the Hebrew calendar,
Adventists use it
the Hebrew.
From the Hebrew as well.
Yeah.
Another calendar thing of what days as well, which I find quite interesting. So it goes down even deep into actually the days and what we use the days for and what days are considered certain things as well. Generally how, and it's from your religion as well. That's quite interesting.
Yeah, so of course, so really the Gregorian calendar was definitely more of a religious thing than anything else. I mean, it definitely fixed the calendar more, but because don't forget the Julian calendar was done by Julius Caesar, and don't forget ancient Rome was still believing in the pagan gods like Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Saturn. But by the time we got to the Gregorian calendar, everyone was mostly Catholic. So some people say that was more of a religious thing, but that's just what.
So from this, I also want to bring up something, as you said, obviously, different countries adopted the Gregorian calendar at different dates. So one of the big things about Europe over this time period is it was racked with warfare of all kinds, a lot of it religious based. When you get in near what would generally be the end of it, you get into the Napoleonic period. There's a famous battle called Austerlitz. At Austerlitz, there were lots of different armies there. And there were lots of different dates it's known by, depending on what country you're from. Because some people were using the Julian calendar, some people were using the Gregorian calendar. And there's another calendar I want to bring up, which is the French calendar of the Revolution.
Yes.
As well, which is the only calendar. So we talked about how a lot of these calendars are based on a religious cycle and a farming cycle. Whereas what they tried to do with the French Revolution calendar is base it on a farming and secular cycle as well. So they completely changed how it would work, and they tried to make it metric as well.
Yep. So let me bring that up for you. The French Revolutionary calendar. Here we go. So so obviously we got fall, and you got the months in French. I'm not even going to try to read that because I don't read French, so there you go. But that's the revolutionary calendar, like you were saying.
And notice how the meanings are, as we're going back to that earlier secular cycle of calendar, they're about farming and when you do your farming and what happens at that time of year.
So, but you look at the fall, which is Fincher. We went from September 22nd to October 21st. So you see the months here. They don't go from the 1st to the 30th. They just start in the middle. They go from the middle of the month to the middle of next month, which is definitely off. Yeah, it's definitely off-putting. And then here you got days like Day of Fortune, September 17th, September 18th was the Day of Engineering. Neighbor Day was September 19th. Day of Opinion, September 20th. September 21st was the Day of Rewards. And then the Day of Revolution, September 22nd, only in leap years. So you had about a week of holidays.
So interestingly, this is the French secular version of Christmas. you think about over the Christmas period where we have
it is very interesting.
5 or so days that we have specific names to them. So you've got your Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, Boxing Day, your New Year's Eve, and your New Year's Day. And then obviously if you're religious, there's other parts that go into that as well, the end of Advent, Christing, all of those days that come into it. So they took the religious calendar and made a secular version of it that was based on this, as we said, this very early calendars of how do we do dates when we're an agricultural community.
Right. So yeah, what is? I gotta say, when I was looking up the French Revolutionary calendar, it was definitely perhaps the most interesting calendar of all of them. You know, I know some people would say, "How about the Mayan calendar?" I actually think this is the more interesting one. You know, the French Revolutionary one. But obviously, for reasons that, you know, it never really got used. It was only used for 12 years, from 1793 to 1805. You know, it was only used for 12 years.
So it rarely comes up. And say the Battle of Austerlitz is one of the few that it comes up in. Even though I think the Battle of Austerlitz was December 1805. It was like right at the end of the calendar. As well, and it was a big changing point in the Napoleonic Wars, which is probably one of the reasons they dropped the calendar, because there was a big change in France after it. As well. So from 1805, so you start getting into that build up into what happens in 1812 as well. But it's really interesting how they've gone back to essentially basics, and they've gone, right, well, we know what this does. We've come out the other side of the Renaissance as well. We're tail end of the Renaissance, so we've got all of this science. So let's throw the science at the calendar and then go back to this original calendar that we have of what it's really about as well, which is about this farming cycle within a year. So calendars, once again, a calendar is all about when you plant your crops and when you dig them up.
That was the intended purpose of a calendar when it started, when it was invented. Yeah, so I mean, before we get off here, because we're already above the hour, but before we get off here, I wanted to ask. I was wondering about a certain thing, a scenario per se. How you think life would have been had we had the Gregorian calendar? How would it might have been if only certain Catholic nations adopted the Gregorian calendar, the Protestants stood with the Julian calendar, and the French had their own calendar? How you think life would have went if that's how it stood? You know, for our history, and we never really changed to the, because you know everybody uses the Gregorian calendar now. But what would have happened if that wasn't the case?
See, I think what I find quite bizarre about it is you'll find more of the Julian calendar in a Catholic nation you will in a Protestant nation as well. The Gregorian calendar, so for example, like we were talking about the days over Christmas and when you do things, they often align more in Catholic nations, so like the Orthodox nations, because they're more traditional dates that were set down a long time ago. So you'd have ended up with this weird structure. So today, for example, we have the civil calendar. It's like English being the lingua franca, which I always find funny, calling it the lingua franca. But English is used by everyone because it's most important. So I think that we'd still be in a situation where we'd use the main calendar of England at the time, but the Julian calendar, if that was the case, would be the one that was then mainly used rather than the Gregorian calendar, because a lot of that comes from aligning to the British Empire with a lot of countries, and it just became easier to use. So the US, while we've had our differences, we align when it comes to things like this in language and in calendars. Ours align a lot. So everyone's used ours because we were the two big powerhouse nations. You went from the British Empire to the rise of the US as the major state in the world currently. So that is what's used as the basis. Everyone sort of like fits themselves into this. So I even find myself saying it now, where I'll say something and then I'll translate it into something relatable to someone from the US, because
Right.
that's a more likely thing that people will be able to understand worldwide, because a lot of it comes from the US. So I think we'd have seen a difference where the Gregorian calendar would have been used in the same way the Julian calendar is used now. But the Julian calendar would have been the big one. They'd have switched places across the world as well. And we would have also seen, I think, more scientific push changing the calendar. So we may have seen something more like the French Revolutionary calendar being pushed for, because the Julian calendar was changed because it was getting wrong. It wasn't working anymore. It needed to be fixed.
It was inaccurate.
Because it was inaccurate. So the more the science has become a thing, you're going to end up changing it. So you're going to end up with a Gregorian calendar, but it's not going to be the Gregorian calendar we know of today. I think you'd end up with a calendar that was more taking cues from the French Revolutionary calendar, because they go, well, look at this. Look at metric, for example. We have metric because it was more easily and widely used because of its base 10 system. And that came from revolutionary France at this time period. So I think we would have had this slightly more scientific calendar rather than religious calendar if it had stayed that way, and it wasn't, and it was adopted the other way around, which would have completely changed how we view a year as well. We may even have had a metric calendar at some point.
That's an interesting question. So when America falls, what calendar system do you think will become the standard if America were to fall?
Depends how America falls. If America falls spectacularly, it will be this is the month of glaciers, and this is the month of nuclear winter storms, and this is the but realistically, I think the Gregorian calendar, because while you've got the Earth's falling would impact Europe, Europe all uses the Gregorian calendar. While socially, the further east you get, the Julian calendar is used. The Gregorian calendar is used as a standard. It's also used as a standard widely across the world. So it's now massively entrenched as well. If you look at dating systems across the world, where we are day, month, year. Whereas the US is month, day, year, which I understand why the system came about, but day, month, year is used more frequently across the world because of the way the system works as well.
Honestly, Dungeon Dad, if all superpowers were to fall, I think we'll be using the sun. We'll be doing the sun dial.
We'll go right back to this. Right, cool. We'll just get it out right. The sun's over there and the moon's over there, so it's this time.
I don't even think a calendar will make. I don't think a calendar will. We even care about calendars anymore. That would happen. We're talking about Armageddon at that point.
I think we'd go to a seasonal calendar, but it'd be very different, because seasons will go back to their natural seasons because we're not impacting the environment so much. However, at the same time, what we do within those seasons changes because of the environment that we're living in as well. But yeah, I think it would overall, it would be some form of the Gregorian calendar, just because of that. Like English, I think English would end up modified as well. Like you get a lot of pidgin English around the world, that the English language would change. Like there's often discussions in the UK about how we wouldn't be able to understand someone from a couple of 100 years ago. You listen to radio announcers from World War II, and they sound completely different to a modern English person. The English language changes so much because we, unlike France, where France has a group of old white guys sat in a room going, no, the language is this. That's never a thing with English. So I think you'd get this modifying with a new base language at the same time. And with that, you then get a modification of the calendar, because people would need to understand it, the systems we're using and the language that we're using to describe it. And we would then use the language of our environment, because some people would track to the old calendar. So it might become the Gregorian calendar, goes back to a religious calendar, because you would get a certain sect of people who would specifically try and follow the dates exactly of these are the things, and this is the thing that would have happened in the past. But we then morph back into, say, like this French Revolutionary calendar, where we go back to this original, we're going to date by seasons, and we're going to look at how everything's working from that perspective.
Right. Well, guys, it's a nuclear fallout calendar.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, guys, we have reached the end of this episode. We are well over the hour. So, really, I might when we go over the hour like this. But before we end it, I want to bring this up by Dungeon Dan. Off subject by Aiden. Are the Mumbas radio stations still running in this situation?
I think the numbers radio stations are still running in general at the moment. They're a big Cold War thing. We still have our backup system in place as well. So if our system's in place, the numbers station should still be. You'll get what that means.
All right. So, guys, thank you for joining us. Dungeon Dan, thank you. And if you missed our show today, don't worry. You can watch the replay and watch it at your own leisure. I found it interesting that how calendars evolved from the Scotland 8000 BC to Egypt and to what we have now. But it's interesting that we still use a lot of the old methods, even in today's technologically advanced world. We still use things like the Farmer's Almanac today. So I really found that very interesting. And yeah, we're very cool as well. All right, guys. So in 2 weeks, as I said, in 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about the Cossacks. Not the modern Cossacks. We're talking about the Ukrainian Cossacks, the Russian Cossacks in the Napoleonic era. And I bumped into this one as I was playing Cossacks for the first time on PC. So this was going to be a pretty fun subject to dig into. Ukraine. Why has Ukraine always been a war-torn country? Don't you see that? Ukraine has always been in war since its formation. So we're going to get into all that in a couple of weeks, guys. But until then, Dungeon Dan, thank you for coming. Yeah, we look forward to the next one. But until then, guys, Happy New Year. I hope 2026 is a wonderful year for all of you. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks. And don't forget, we're 5 episodes away from episode number 50. And that,
we are.
And by the way, I already have a date for that one. That will be March the 15th. March the 15th. And for our real history buffs, you might recognize March the 15th, 44 BC. You might recognize that date. So, I will be live then, and we got something cooking for you guys. But until then, thank you for coming. We'll see you on the next show. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, guys. And Happy New Year. Take care, guys.
Take care. Bye-bye.